Have you ever looked at a car from the 1970s and thought, how was that even legal? Because honestly, a lot of what was totally normal back then would get a car pulled off a dealer lot today before the doors even opened. We are talking features that were everywhere, things people never questioned, that are now flat-out banned, regulated into oblivion, or so dangerous they make modern safety engineers break into a cold sweat. Today, we are counting down 25 old car features that were completely normal in the 1970s, but are illegal now. If you enjoy this kind of deep dive into automotive history, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe so you do not miss the next one. Let us get into it. Number 25. Leaded gasoline. For decades, every car on the road ran on gasoline laced with lead. Tetraethyl lead was added to fuel starting in the 1920s because it solved engine knock, that annoying pinging sound under load. It worked beautifully. Engines ran smoother, lasted longer. But people knew lead was toxic from day one. In 1924, refinery workers started dying from lead poisoning. Some went literally insane before they collapsed. The oil companies waved it off and kept pumping leaded gas for the next 50 years. By the 70s, almost all gasoline worldwide contained lead. Kids near busy roads had dangerously high blood lead levels. Research linked it to brain damage, lower IQs, even increased crime rates. The EPA stepped in during 1973 and began the phase-out. But leaded gasoline was not fully banned in the United States until 1996. The last country on Earth to stop selling it was Algeria in 2021. A fuel additive that poisoned millions lasted nearly a century. Number 24. No catalytic converters. Before 1975, cars belched raw exhaust straight into the atmosphere, no filter, no conversion, nothing. Carbon monoxide, hydrocarbons, nitrogen oxides all went right out the tailpipe into the air you breathed at every stoplight. The Clean Air Act of 1970 demanded a 90% reduction in vehicle emissions within 5 years, and the only technology that could do it was the catalytic converter. Starting with the 1975 model year, every new car had to have one. The auto industry fought hard, claiming it would kill horsepower and cost too much. The early converters were not great. They did restrict exhaust flow, but they prevented untold amounts of toxic gas from choking cities. Today, removing a catalytic converter from any post-1975 vehicle is a federal crime with fines in the thousands. Meanwhile, thieves steal them off parked cars because the precious metals inside, platinum, palladium, and rhodium, are worth a fortune. Number 23. No seatbelt laws. This one blows some minds. In the 70s, seatbelts existed in cars. They had been mandatory equipment since 1968. But here is the kicker. Nobody had to actually wear them. There was no law requiring you to buckle up. People treated seatbelts like suggestions. They sat on them, tucked them behind the seat, or just ignored them. Kids bounced around the back seat like pinballs. The government tried to force the issue in 1974 by requiring an interlock that prevented the car from starting unless belts were fastened. The public hated it so much that Congress passed a law banning seatbelt interlocks. It was not until 1984 that New York became the first state to pass a mandatory seatbelt law. Other states slowly followed, but it took until the mid-90s before most of America required adults to buckle up. Today, not wearing a seatbelt gets you pulled over and fined in nearly every state. But in the 70s, you could cruise at 60 miles per hour with nothing between you and the windshield but hope. Number 22. No airbags. You are driving a 1973 Impala. You hit something head-on. What protects you? A steering wheel, a metal dashboard, and maybe a lap belt if you bothered? No airbag. Nothing inflating between your face and the steering column. Airbags were patented back in 1919, but the technology was not ready for decades. General Motors experimented with them in the mid-70s, offering them as options on some models, but almost nobody bought them. It was not until 1998 that federal law required both driver and passenger airbags in all new cars. Today, a typical car has 6 to 10 airbags, some luxury models over 20. Side curtain airbags, knee airbags, even seatbelt airbags. Back in the 70s, you had the dashboard and your 2 arms. Good luck. Number 21. Chrome bumpers. Those big gleaming chrome bumpers on 70s cars looked absolutely gorgeous. They stuck out front and rear like the jaw of a prizefighter, catching sunlight and turning heads. The problem? They were basically decorative. They looked tough but crumbled like tin foil in an actual collision. In the early 70s, new federal safety regulations required bumpers to withstand impacts at 5 miles per hour without damage to the car's safety systems. Chrome could not cut it. Manufacturers had to switch to energy-absorbing bumpers made from steel and aluminum, often wrapped in rubber or plastic. The chrome era was over, and it did not stop there. In 2024, European regulators banned chrome plating on new car components entirely, this time citing the toxicity of chromium as an airborne carcinogen. American manufacturers are scheduled to follow suit by 2039. So those gleaming chrome beauties from the 70s are not just outdated. They are being erased from automotive history, one regulation at a time. Number 20. Hood ornaments. The hood ornament was the crown jewel of automotive design, a chrome figure perched on the nose of your car, announcing to the world that you had arrived. Cadillac had its goddess, Rolls-Royce had its spirit of ecstasy, Pontiac had its arrowhead. In the 70s, nearly every manufacturer slapped some kind of ornamental figure on the hood. They were symbols of status, of brand identity, of style. But they were also little chrome spears pointed directly at pedestrians. When safety regulators started looking at what happened when cars hit people, hood ornaments became an obvious problem. They could impale, slash, or cause serious head injuries on impact. Pedestrian safety regulations, particularly in Europe, began requiring that car fronts be smooth, blunt, and deformable. Hood ornaments had to go. Some manufacturers found workarounds. Rolls-Royce famously designed a retractable spirit of ecstasy that sinks into the hood if tampered with or during a collision, but for most cars, the ornament simply vanished. Today, they are collector's items, relics of an era when car design prioritized looking dangerous over actually being safe. Number 19. Pop-up headlights. If you grew up in the 70s or 80s, you remember pop-up headlights, that beautiful mechanical wink when you flipped them on. The Corvette, the Porsche 928, the Lamborghini Countach, they all had them. Pop-ups solved a real problem. Federal regulations required headlights at a certain height, which did not work for sleek sports cars. So designers hid the headlights and popped them up when needed. But the mechanisms failed constantly, leaving drivers with one eye open and one shut. And when pedestrian safety regulations tightened, especially after a 2004 European study, the protruding housings were deemed too dangerous, creating sharp edges that could seriously injure pedestrians. Pop-ups are not technically illegal in the United States, but meeting modern global safety standards with them is so expensive that no manufacturer bothers. The last production cars with pop-ups were the Lotus Esprit and Corvette C5, both ending in 2004. Number 18. Suicide doors, rear-hinged doors. Sounds innocent enough, but they got the name suicide doors for a reason. Before seatbelts and reliable door locks, a rear-hinged door could swing open while the car was moving, and the wind would catch it like a sail. If you were leaning against it, you were going for an unplanned exit at highway speed. In the 60s and 70s, they were everywhere. The Lincoln Continental made them iconic. They looked elegant and made getting in and out easier. But Ralph Nader's book, Unsafe at Any Speed, called them out as dangerous. Seatbelt mandates and stronger door lock regulations effectively killed the design by the early 70s. The last American car with traditional suicide doors was the Ford Thunderbird, ending in 1971. Today, rear hinge doors have made a quiet comeback on vehicles like the Rolls-Royce Ghost, but only with modern clamshell locks and safety interlocks that make accidental opening virtually impossible. The old-style versions, not road legal by today's standards. Number 17. Pillarless hardtop bodies. In the 50s, 60s, and into the 70s, the pillarless hardtop was the look. No B-pillar between the front and rear windows meant that when you rolled all the windows down, you had this gorgeous open-air panorama. It looked like a convertible with a roof. Cadillac, Buick, Chrysler, virtually every American manufacturer offered pillarless models. They were the premium choice, the step up from the plain sedan. The problem was structural integrity. Without that center pillar, the car was dramatically weaker in a rollover or side impact collision. As federal safety regulations tightened through the 70s, manufacturers started sweating. The last true American pillarless hardtops were the 1978 Chrysler Newport and New Yorker. After that, the B-pillar came back, often disguised behind tinted glass or vinyl to fake the hardtop look. Today, modern rollover and side impact standards make a true pillarless design nearly impossible to certify without massive engineering investment. A few European luxury brands still dabble in it, but the golden age of the pillarless hardtop is gone. Number 16. Front bench seats. The front bench seat. 3 people across the front. Mom in the middle snuggled up next to Dad while he drove with one hand on the wheel and the other around her shoulder. It was the automotive symbol of family togetherness. In the 70s, front bench seats were standard in nearly every American car. Full-size sedans, station wagons, even some muscle cars had them. But they had zero individual restraint capability. There were no separate headrests, no individual seatbelt anchoring points designed for 3 distinct passengers, and the middle seat occupant was basically riding on a prayer. When 3-point seatbelts became mandatory, when individual headrests were required, when airbag placement became critical, the bench seat became an engineering nightmare. Bucket seats with center consoles replaced them across the industry. Today you will still find front bench seats in some pickup trucks, but they are a dying breed. The regulations around individual occupant restraint systems have made the classic 3-across front bench effectively extinct in passenger cars. Number 15. Rear-facing. Third-row seats, station wagons in the 70s had this wild feature, a fold-down rear seat that faced backward right up against the tailgate. Kids loved it. You would sit back there waving at the cars behind you, completely unrestrained, with nothing between you and oncoming traffic except a thin sheet of glass and a latch that may or may not have been properly secured. These rear-facing seats typically had no headrests, no seatbelts, and in some cases, no padding worth mentioning. If someone rear-ended the wagon, the kids in that back seat were essentially human projectiles. It was the most dangerous seating position in any vehicle, and it was marketed as a fun feature for families. Modern safety standards require all seating positions to have proper restraints, headrests, and meet crash test requirements. Rear-facing seats in the cargo area of station wagons have been effectively eliminated from new vehicle production. Some SUVs offer third-row seating, but always forward-facing and always with full seatbelt systems. The days of kids bouncing around in the back of a country Squire? Mercifully over. Number 14. No child safety seat requirements. In the 70s, there was essentially no federal requirement for child safety seats. Before 1972, child restraints had zero mandatory performance standards. Babies rode home from the hospital on mom's lap. Toddlers stood on the front seat holding the dashboard. Kids sat wherever they wanted, completely unrestrained. The first federal standard came in 1972, but it only required basic structural strength, not actual crash testing. It was not until the mid-'80s that every state mandated child safety seats. And the seats available in the '70s were more like booster chairs than safety devices, basically fabric slings attached with a hook. The evolution to today's rear-facing infant seats, 5-point harnesses, latch systems, and booster requirements up to age 8 or 10 is one of the most dramatic safety transformations in automotive history. Number 13. Kids riding in truck beds. Pure '70s nostalgia. Saturday afternoon, the whole neighborhood piled into somebody's pickup. No canopy, no seats, no seatbelts. Just kids sitting on wheel wells or hanging over the tailgate while Dad drove to the lake. It was normal. In rural America, practically a rite of passage. Wind in your hair, one good bump away from tumbling onto the highway. Today, riding in the back of a pickup is illegal in most states, especially for children. Laws vary, some ban it entirely, others allow it at low speeds on certain roads. But the consensus is clear. Studies showed truck bed ejections accounted for hundreds of deaths annually. It took decades of lobbying and heartbreaking stories to change the laws. But in the '70s, it was just Tuesday. Number 12. Smoking in cars with children. Every car in the '70s came standard with an ashtray and a cigarette lighter. Not as options, standard. Because in the '70s, everybody smoked everywhere. Offices, restaurants, airplanes, hospitals, and absolutely in cars. Windows might be cracked an inch if you were lucky, but often the car was just a sealed smoke chamber with kids in the back seat inhaling every puff. Today, more than half of American states have laws restricting or outright banning smoking in vehicles when children are present. The built-in ashtray and cigarette lighter have been removed from virtually all new vehicles. What used to be the lighter socket is now a 12-volt power outlet for your phone charger. The cultural shift has been seismic. Smoking went from a sign of cool sophistication to a regulated health hazard in the span of a generation. And the idea that parents once routinely hotboxed their station wagons with their kids sealed inside? That is the kind of thing that makes you realize the '70s were a completely different universe. Number 11. No crumple zones cars in the '70s were built like tanks. Heavy-gauge steel, rigid frames, massive weight. People bragged about how solid they felt. Close the door, and it sounded like a bank vault. The problem? All that rigidity was terrible in a crash. A rigid car does not absorb energy. It transfers it directly to the occupants. Your body becomes the crumple zone. Modern vehicles have carefully designed crumple zones, areas built to deform in a controlled way during a collision, absorbing impact before it reaches the passenger cabin. The cabin itself uses ultra-high-strength steel that resists deformation. Cars in the '70s had none of this. The entire structure was one block of steel. In a head-on collision, the steering column could be driven into the driver's chest. The engine could be pushed into the cabin. Building a new car without crumple zones today would fail every federal crash test and never receive certification. Number 10. Non-collapsible steering columns. Speaking of steering columns being driven into drivers' chests, let us talk about this one specifically. In the '70s, many cars still had rigid, non-collapsible steering columns. In a frontal collision, the steering column acted like a battering ram aimed directly at the driver's ribcage. It was one of the leading causes of fatal chest injuries in car accidents. The concept of a collapsible steering column, one that telescopes or breaks apart on impact to absorb energy, was patented by Bella Baregni for Mercedes-Benz in the 1950s. General Motors began installing them in the late '60s after significant pressure from safety advocates. But throughout the '70s, plenty of older vehicles and some new models still used rigid columns. Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standard number 204 eventually mandated collapsible steering columns in all new vehicles. Today, Every car on the road has one, often combined with an airbag mounted in the steering wheel hub. The combination of a collapsible column and an airbag has reduced fatal steering column injuries by an estimated 90%. Number 9. Metal dashboards. Imagine hitting your head on a slab of steel at 40 miles per hour. That was a crash in a 70s car with a metal dashboard. Chrome trim, hard plastic knobs, protruding switches, rigid metal surfaces everywhere. Getting thrown forward meant your face met something about as forgiving as a cast-iron skillet. Federal standards began requiring padded dashboards and recessed controls in the late 60s, but many vehicles through the 70s still had hard, unforgiving interiors. Today, dashboards use energy-absorbing materials, breakaway components, and carefully calculated geometry to minimize injury. Even trim pieces deform on impact. The contrast between a 1972 Dodge Dart and a modern sedan is staggering. One feels like sitting inside a weapon. The other feels like a cocoon. Number 8. Fender-mounted side mirrors. Here is a subtle one that most people never think about. In the 70s, it was common for cars to have their side mirrors mounted on the fenders up near the front of the hood rather than on the doors where we see them today. They looked elegant. They provided a wider field of view by reducing blind spots. Japanese cars especially loved this design. But there was a critical problem. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration issued a standard requiring that side mirrors be adjustable by the driver from the seated position by tilting in both horizontal and vertical directions. Fender-mounted mirrors were simply too far away for the driver to reach while sitting behind the wheel. You would have to either get out of the car or ask your passenger to adjust them. That made them essentially non-compliant with federal regulations. Today, all side mirrors are door-mounted with either manual cables or electric motors for adjustment. Some modern vehicles have even replaced mirrors entirely with camera systems. The fender-mounted mirror lives on only in vintage car collections and the memories of people who thought they looked incredibly cool, which, to be fair, they did. Number 7. No emissions testing. In the early 70s, you could drive a car belching visible clouds of black smoke and nobody could do a thing about it. No emissions inspections, no annual smog checks, no standards your car had to meet once it left the factory. The Clean Air Act of 1970 began regulating tailpipe emissions for new vehicles, but testing cars already on the road took much longer. States implemented emissions programs throughout the late 70s and 80s, but it was patchwork. Some had strict testing, others nothing. Today, most urban areas require periodic emissions testing. If your vehicle fails, you cannot register it until repairs are made. The transformation from the 70s, when you could drive a rolling smokestack with zero consequences, to today's world of onboard diagnostics and mandatory inspections, is one of the biggest environmental shifts in automotive history. Number 6. Massive unregulated engines. The 70s started with the tail end of the muscle car era, when Detroit was locked in an arms race of cubic inches and horsepower. 455 cubic inch V8s, 440 big blocks, 7-liter monsters getting 8 miles per gallon on a good day. There were no fuel economy standards. Manufacturers could put whatever engine they wanted in whatever car with zero regard for efficiency. Then came the 1973 oil embargo. Gas prices skyrocketed, lines at stations stretched for blocks. Congress responded with CAFE standards, setting mandatory fuel efficiency targets. Those massive engines became liabilities. Horsepower plummeted through the late 70s as engineers scrambled to meet emissions and efficiency targets. Today, CAFE standards keep tightening, and manufacturers face enormous fines if fleet averages fall short. Putting a 7-liter engine in a family sedan with no emissions controls, that is a relic of a completely different reality. Number 5. No headrests. This is one of those features that seems so basic, so obvious, that it is hard to believe it was ever optional. But in the late 60s and into the 70s, headrests were just becoming mandatory. Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standard Number 202 required front seat head restraints in all new passenger cars starting January 1st, 1969. But for years before that, they were either absent entirely or offered as options that most buyers skipped. And rear seat headrests? Those were not required for decades after the front ones. Without a headrest, a rear-end collision meant your head snapped violently backward with nothing to stop it. The result was whiplash at best, catastrophic spinal cord injury at worst. The physics are brutal. Your body gets pushed forward by the seat, but your head stays in place due to inertia, hyperextending the neck. Headrests prevent this by catching the head before it travels too far. Today, all seating positions in new vehicles must have properly positioned head restraints. Active headrests that move forward during a collision to close the gap even faster are standard on many models. Something so simple, saving so many necks, literally. Number 4. Neon underglow lights. In the 70s, customizing your car was an expression of pure individuality. And one of the most popular modifications was neon underglow lighting. Tubes of colored neon mounted beneath the chassis, bathing the road in purple, green, blue, or red light. It looked like your car was floating on a glowing cloud. Car shows, cruise nights, and drag strips were awash in neon. The problem is that neon underglow can be extremely distracting to other drivers, and certain colors create confusion with emergency vehicles. Blue and red lights are universally reserved for law enforcement. Flashing lights of any color can be mistaken for emergency signals. Today, external neon lights are illegal in several states, including Washington, Michigan, Connecticut, Illinois, Maine, Massachusetts, Virginia, Minnesota, and Pennsylvania. In states where they are legal, there are strict restrictions on colors, brightness, and whether the light source itself is visible. The days of rolling down the boulevard with your car lit up like a UFO are largely over. Number 3. No third brake light. Count the brake lights on any modern car. 3. 2 at the rear corners and 1 high in the center. That center-mounted high brake light did not exist on production cars in the 70s. It was not required until 1986 for passenger cars. Before that, 2 brake lights, and that was it. If the car ahead was filthy or it was raining, you might not notice them light up until too late. Research in the early 80s showed the third brake light reduced rear-end collisions by about 50% in the first year. The science was clear. A highly visible center brake light significantly reduces reaction time for following drivers. Today, driving without one is not legal. It is one of those regulations that seems so obvious. In hindsight, you wonder how it took until the mid-80s. Number 2. Fuzzy dice and rear-view mirror hangings. Here is one that is going to hit different. Those fuzzy dice dangling from the rear-view mirror, the air freshener trees, the graduation tassels, the little dream catchers. In the 70s, hanging things from your rearview mirror was as natural as turning the key in the ignition. It was personal expression, your car, your mirror, your fuzzy dice. But today, in a growing number of states, hanging objects from your rearview mirror is illegal. The logic is straightforward. Anything dangling from the mirror obstructs the driver's field of vision. Even a small air freshener can block your view of a pedestrian or a cyclist at exactly the wrong moment. States like California, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Minnesota, and others have laws prohibiting objects that obstruct the driver's view through the windshield. And yes, that includes those iconic fuzzy dice. Enforcement varies wildly, and plenty of people still do it without getting cited. But the law is on the books. Number 1, radar detectors. And finally, at number 1, the gadget that turned every highway into a cat-and-mouse game, radar detectors. In the 70s, these devices exploded in popularity. The national speed limit had just dropped to 55 miles per hour to conserve fuel, and nobody wanted to drive that slow. Radar detectors gave drivers an edge, beeping whenever they picked up police radar, giving just enough warning to slow down. They were mounted on dashboards everywhere. Truck stops sold them, gas stations had them. It was a cottage industry. And in the 70s, they were legal everywhere. Today, radar detectors are banned in Virginia and Washington, D.C. for all vehicles. They are illegal in all commercial vehicles over 18,000 pounds nationwide. Laws around radar jammers and laser jammers have tightened considerably. Military bases ban them. Some municipalities have local ordinances against them. The golden age of outsmarting Smokey with a fuzzbuster on the dash is a shadow of what it was. Like so many things on this list, that era is gone. And there you have it, 25 old car features that were completely normal in the 1970s, but would land you in serious trouble today. It is honestly wild how much has changed. What used to be everyday driving is now a museum exhibit of terrible ideas and non-existent safety standards. Which of these surprised you the most? And did we miss any that you remember from back in the day? Let us know in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this trip through automotive history, do us a favor and hit that like button, subscribe, and tap the notification bell so you do not miss the next one. Thanks for watching, and we will see you next time.